Welcome back to 8 Metal Strings. Today we're checking out how to play bass lines on the 8-string guitar. Thanks to the extra low strings that we are afforded on this instrument, we can now actually play bass lines in the bass range. This will eventually lead into playing the accompaniment on top of your own bass lines, basically creating a self-sufficient duet within one player. So in this video we're just going to be breaking down the bass line aspect of that duet, and it is going to be from the perspective of a jazz musician, or at least somebody who has jazz education in their background. So if some of these theoretical terms don't make sense in the video, it is probably because you have heard them in a classical setting versus a jazz setting. Unfortunately, in this video I will not be able to go in depth into every theoretical term that I'm talking about. I'll try to give high-level overviews when I can, but if there's something that you don't understand, please take the time to pause the video, look it up, understand it, and then come back. The PDF for this video is a chunky one, so make sure you download it before we get going, and the link can be found in the description below. I've also created some backing tracks for the exercises of the PDF, and you can download those as well from the second link in the description. If you are already somewhat knowledgeable in this area and understand some of the basics on how to play bass lines, please use the chapter markers found in the description below or just in the play bar to jump to where you need to be. And lastly, the obligatory PSA and expectation management announcement. You will not learn how to do this technique well simply by watching this video and playing through the exercises that I've given you on the PDF. Learning to improvise and play bass lines fluently is really more of a mental practice than anything to do with technique, and creating those new mental pathways takes quite a bit of time. It requires intuitive knowledge about the fingerboard and chord theory so that you don't have to spend too much time thinking about what notes you need to play and where you have to find those notes on your instrument. And really all of this is just to say, please have some patience with yourself. Learning this technique at that intuitive level can take months, if not years, to get down, and depending on your goals, it could take even longer. So the first thing we need in order to play some bass lines are some chord changes. So feel free to pick any song that you like playing or listening to, and the more interesting the chord changes are, the more fun it will be to play the bass lines on. For the purposes of our PDF exercises and this video, I have chosen All of the Things You Are, which is just a very common jazz standard, and I think serves as a nice basis for working on some common bass line tropes and mechanisms. So the first thing that we have to get very comfortable doing is just playing the roots of the chords as they go by in time. So for this exercise, take whatever song you're working on, and you're going to follow along with the chord changes, playing just the root note, which would be the name of the chord or the letter name of the chord, as the chord changes. So usually this will be a whole note, sometimes a half note. For example, if the chord is a C7, we're not going to worry about the 7 part, we're just going to play a C. If the chord is an A flat major 7, we're just going to play an A flat. You're going to want to spend as much time as you can in this stage of development and continue coming back here as we progress to the harder exercises. It is fundamentally important to be able to just play the roots of every chord without thinking. To create variation when you're working on this exercise, you can play the roots in different positions and different octaves. You can find different songs to work on, you can practice them at different tempos, and of course, use a metronome when you're doing this. Being able to think ahead to that next chord change, and to think about something that we're not playing in the present moment, is one of the key things we have to be able to do when we're playing bass lines. It will kind of be like the first time you ever had to learn long division or algebra or something, where it just breaks the brain a little bit and forges new neural networks, but if you keep at it, you will be able to do it. Just keep the tempos at a reasonable place and work on some chord changes that don't move too fast. As we start to get more comfortable playing the roots of the chord changes when they change, we can start to add the 5th. So for example, if we're playing a C minor 7, we can play the root to start, and then halfway through that measure, we can play the G, or the G below. Let's say that after that C minor 7, it is followed by a B minor 7 flat 5, or half diminished chord. So we play the root of the B, and then because this chord has a flat 5 in it, we're going to play F natural, not F sharp. So that 2-chord sequence would look like this. If the song that you're working on is in 3/4 time signature, your chords will not fit into an even half note division of the measure. Instead, we have 2 options. The first is to play dotted quarter notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. The other option is to put the second note on beat 3, and the first one will still be a half note. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can also start to experiment using the third instead of the fifth on that second note. This can often lead to smoother transitions between chords. So experiment with your chord changes, trying the fifth or the third, and see which ones you like the sound of better. Then, just as we did in the first exercise, you can start to add some variations by changing the position that you're playing the song in, changing the tempo you're playing, or changing the song you're playing completely. We want to make sure that we're not just completely memorizing and not thinking about the notes anymore when we're practicing these things. Always try to keep it so that you have to think at least a little bit when you're working on this stuff. Editing Thomas here, just jumping in to let you know that on July the 27th at 10 a.m. Pacific, I will be running a workshop that goes more in depth into these bassline concepts we're discussing in the video. So if you want extra personalized help, some extra exercises, or maybe just some more in-depth discussion about these concepts, then be sure to sign up in the link below. The slots are limited because I want to make sure I can offer any personalized help that is needed if you have any questions. So get on that if you're interested. Otherwise, back to the video. Now that we have beat 1 and beat 3 taken care of, we can start to fill in beat 2 and 4, and for the first time create a walking bassline feel. For now, we're just going to keep the root on beat 1 at all times, and aim for the 5th on beat 3. On beat 2 and beat 4, we can add the 3rd or 7th, or we can return to any of the other notes that we've already played. This will kind of give an arpeggiating sound to our bass lines. This is also where having a good grasp on the theoretical knowledge of chord tones comes in handy. If you understand what notes are in what chords, you'll be much quicker at this and able to think ahead much easier. If you're finding your fingers are moving fast enough but your brain is having a hard time keeping up, it might be a good time to break out a theory textbook or do some exercises naming notes and chords. As with everything so far, make sure you're able to do this fairly comfortably in different songs, different positions, different tempos, before moving on to the next exercise. Being able to highlight the sounds of chords clearly is key before we start to loosen up the rules a little bit and have a little more fun with it. So the next level of this exercise is to not force yourself to play the root on beat 1 every time. Instead, you can play any of the chord tones and just try to create a smooth, fluid bass line that moves mostly by steps and thirds and occasionally by fifth. But we're still just sticking to chord tones for now, so don't start adding any notes that are not part of your chord. Alright, now here is where we get to have a little bit more fun. We're going to start replacing some chord tones with non-chord tones. That essentially means any note that does not belong in the chord. Sometimes it doesn't even belong in the key that that chord comes from. The purpose of non-harmonic tones or non-chord tones is simply to move from one pitch that is within a chord to another pitch in another chord in the smoothest way possible. It also adds a level of tension and release to our bass line. When there is a note that does not belong in a chord sounding, our ear really wants it to resolve somewhere. So we create this internal drama within our bass line that makes the music much more exciting to listen to. For this to work best, it's good to still keep a strong chord tone on beat 1 and beat 3, but this rule doesn't have to be stuck to strictly. There are a few different types of non-harmonic tones that we can make use of here. The most common is going to be a passing tone. So let's say, for example, we have our C minor chord. We're going to play the C on beat 1, and we want to aim to play the flat third on beat 3. To get there, we could simply just add the D in the middle, and that is going to create a nice smooth and scalar motion toward our next chord tone. If our next chord is then going to be an F of some sort, and we've just landed on that E flat on beat 3, our F is only a whole tone away. To continue that smooth motion, that smooth line, we can put an E natural in between the two notes. Now that E natural is not in the C minor chord, and if our second chord is like an F7 or an F minor of some sort, it is not in that chord either. However, it creates a very strong upward pulling motion and connects our two chords very smoothly. Another very common non-harmonic tone that is used when creating bass lines is something called the Appoggiatura. This can be defined as leaping away from one of your pitches and then resolving to your target pitch by a step. So for example, if we're playing over a C minor chord, we'll probably start on our root again, and let's say this time though we want to arrive at our G on beat 3. Now G is a little too far away in order to create a smooth passing tone type situation, so instead we can leap to a note that is above or below the G and then resolve to it. So if we were to leap above, it would look something like this. Or to the A natural instead of the A flat if the chord change fits that note better. And if we leap to a note below the G and then resolve up, it would sound like this. So the Appoggiatura creates a very strong forward momentum or forward pulling motion when it is used. So if you want to create a sense of direction in your bass line, you can throw in some of these resolutions where you leap from your note that you're starting on and then resolve by step or half step to the note that you want to arrive at. The last non-harmonic tone that we're going to use is the neighbor tone. This is kind of essentially what it sounds like, where we go over to our neighbor's house and then come back. We're not really going very far. So in the context of our notes, if we're playing on our C minor, we might just want to drop down to a natural B before returning to the C, or we could go up to a D, or even a D flat. This is a great way of creating movement when you're just stuck on one chord for a while. So in this example here, I'm just going to use neighbor tones and the occasional passing tone to highlight the chord tones of the C minor chord. So all of that can be said to be in C minor. I'm just playing some notes that are around the chord tones and returning to the chord tones just to add a little bit of spice. So I just want to acknowledge, if you have gotten to this level in your bassline playing and you are playing through this stuff smoothly and intuitively, that is awesome. You are good to go in creating your own bass lines and starting to add some accompaniment on top of it. What follows now are just a couple of more advanced techniques that you can use to really add some different flavors into your bass lines. Harmonic substitutions are essentially changing a chord that is already in the song for a different chord. And sometimes we can even add chords that don't exist into our song to create new movement and motion. So the two most common ways of doing this are by creating secondary dominants that will lead into the chords that already exist, and the other way is to create tritone substitutions. Both of these methods will still leave you with a very smooth bass line and smooth transitions between your chord changes. However, it will leave you with a different characteristic than the non-harmonic tones or chord tones that we have looked at thus far. A secondary dominant essentially means adding a 5/7 chord, or a dominant chord, before the target chord. So a quick example, if our chord change goes from C minor to D minor, we could insert an A7, the 5/7 of D, before the D minor chord. And it still sounds very musical. It is in itself a very common chord progression, but it was not in the original song and we have thus created it. The tritone substitution is when you take a dominant chord and replace it for another dominant chord that is a tritone away. So here's just one way that you could utilize these chord substitutions to create some interest in your bass line. So far, every new development that we've made has been to do with the pitches that we're playing in our bass line. We have not yet addressed the rhythm and rhythmic variations that we can do to make things more interesting. The first of these that I want to share with you is the triplet pickup note. What this means is we're going to play a note on the third triplet of the beat, or the third eighth note triplet of the beat, to be more precise, and then let that lead into our following note. This really highlights the swing feel of the song if we're playing in swing. So maybe don't use it if you're playing in a straight eighth situation. Instead, you could use straight eighth notes or 16th note subdivisions. The second rhythmic tool that I want to share with you is the Triplet Drop. This technique is used by jazz bass players across all generations and allows them to connect high notes with low notes or connect large leaps. One example of it would look like this. Another example could be something like this. But you can see it connects a position shift or it connects a large jump across strings by using open strings in between and filling out that triplet subdivision. If you're using your finger, you're just going to drag your finger across the strings, and if you're using a pick, you just kind of drag your pick across the strings, and I like to mute the strings as well a little bit so that they don't continue to ring out, because they're just quick passing tones highlighting the rhythmic subdivision of our song. Use this sparingly. It's a super cool thing when it pops out once in a while, but when overdone it can be very annoying and very tropey, and also try to fit it in a good spot. Certain chord changes are going to work better where the open strings actually belong to the key of the chord. So for example, on the standard tuning of the A string, we have A, E, B, and F sharp as open strings on our low side. So if those notes do not belong in the chord, like if a B flat chord, it probably won't sound as good as if it was over a chord where it did belong. My favorite exercise for working on bass lines and for learning the notes of your neck, in fact, was introduced to me by one of my teachers when I was in my undergrad. So here's how it goes. Rule 1, we have to define a range. So that means picking your lowest note and your highest note that you're choosing to play in whatever position you choose to play, and making sure that whatever you're going to play during the exercise stays within those pitches. We're not allowed to go above or below them. Rule number 2, you're only allowed to move in one direction at a time. So if you are ascending, you have to keep ascending until you reach the top of your range, at which point you're allowed to turn around and go down. But then you have to continue descending until you reach the bottom of your range, and then you're going to turn around again. Rule number 3, you're only allowed to move 1 or 2 frets at a time, so no leaps or no jumps. There are some exceptions because in some chords there might be an augmented second, which sounds like a minor third, so you can use those if you have to, but for 99% of the chords you're going to just use a 1 fret or 2 fret motion at a time. Rule number 4, you still want to try to outline the harmony of the chord changes that you're playing. To do this, aim your chord tones to fall on beat 1 and beat 3 if you can, and leave passing tones and other non-harmonic tones to the weak beats 2 and 4. There are some variations for this exercise to make it easier or harder. The easiest is going to be just to play whole notes. It's going to get a little bit harder as we play half notes. Quarter notes I find is the sweet spot, especially since we're working on bass lines, and then it gets even harder if you want to do 8th notes or triplets or 16th notes. Please remember that you're going to need to do this on your own, and that the example of the PDF is only one possible outcome, starting on one particular pitch over a particular set of chord changes with one range that I've chosen. So try this on different songs, starting on different chord tones in different positions, and you're going to start to very quickly develop the ability to connect your chord changes in a very restricted set of rules. Once you can do this, it's going to feel very easy and freeing once you go back to being able to change direction and do lots of jumps and leaps in your bass line. So that's it for our basics on creating bass lines. With all of this information, you essentially have a couple of years worth of material to practice, depending on your goals. It's just going to take time to internalize these concepts and work them into your muscle memory as well. If you are enjoying what I'm doing on this channel, putting out free educational material for the 8-string guitar, then please consider supporting me at my Buy Me a Coffee page down below, or for signing up for some online lessons. It would mean a lot to me, and it allows me to continue making this stuff for you for free. With all that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. If you're in a heat wave like I am right now, please keep cool, drink lots of water, and until next time, happy practicing.